A Union soldier once wrote, "Of all the horrible suffering, I hope I may never witness the like again. Union and rebel lying side by side with their limbs blown off or shattered to pieces. One rebel with his arms blown off told me if he were in his grave, he would not suffer so." Confederate soldier Henry Perry wrote, "The spectacle presented by the battlefield was enough to make angels weep."
I am Marley McCormick with the Tennessee Valley Civil War Roundtable. I'm here at Maple Hill Cemetery in Huntsville with Jacque Reeves, a premier Civil War historian of the city. She is going to talk to us a bit about a few of the soldiers buried here.
Maple Hill Cemetery was established about 1818. We know that the earliest grave was 1820. But I'm going to step over and talk about Colonel Egbert J. Jones, the first person from Huntsville to be killed in the Civil War. Colonel Jones was a prominent attorney here in Huntsville. Colonel Jones had helped to gather together his men who became part of the 4th Alabama, and they were not very happy with him. He was expecting too much of them, and so they complained to his commanding officer. They wanted him to resign. So he went to them and he said, "Give me one chance in battle, and if you're not happy with me, I will voluntarily resign." That first chance in battle was the First Battle of Manassas. He was sitting atop his horse and directing his men into battle when he was shot through the hip. Unfortunately, it took him several days to die because his hip had become infected, and his burial here in Huntsville was the first to take place here at the home of his in-laws on Eccles Hill. Clement Comer Clay was Alabama's 8th governor. By the time of the Civil War, in 1863, he was 73 years old and he was very feeble. Union soldiers had gone to his home in Gurley and forced him to come into Huntsville. His home was raided several times and a lot was taken from him, and he was given vouchers to claim compensation for his losses. His claims were all denied. Lieutenant George March wrote, "If there is one secessionist in Alabama more bitter, violent, virulent, and hostile to the Union than all others, Mr. C.C. Clay is that person." He died very shortly after the Civil War was over, and his son was a prisoner of war at Fortress Monroe, Virginia at the time. Edmund Irby Maston was a member of the Immortal 600. He was one of 600 Confederate officers who were held on Morris Island outside of Charleston. President Lincoln wanted to get control of Charleston because that's where the war started. So they had, the Confederates had taken some Union soldiers and kept them inside Charleston in some buildings so that the Union soldiers would quit bombing Charleston. In retaliation, they took the 600 soldiers, Confederates, and put them on Morris Island, hoping that the Confederates would stop bombing Morris Island, where the Union soldiers were. During that time, there was a 567-day siege, and no soldiers were killed in that event, although some of the bombs had blown up overhead, but they were never injured at that time. But they did suffer terribly from malnutrition. They lost their teeth. A lot of them died from starvation. Their skin turned black, but eventually they were taken to other prisoner of war camps. Edmund Maston came back after the war, where he served as Huntsville's mayor for 3 terms. Jeremiah Clemens was a local politician and a novelist. He was related to Samuel Clemens, also known as Mark Twain. He was a flip-flop during the Civil War, for the Confederacy, then for the Union, and by the end of the war he was pro-Union. In February of 1865, he wrote a letter to President Abraham Lincoln, and he said, "We know how the war is going to end, and you need to have somebody who is a local, somebody from Alabama who can lead the state." And that would be, after 6 pages, he said, "Me." Well, unfortunately, we don't know if there was ever a reply from President Lincoln, because he died in 1865 by an assassin's bullet, and Jeremiah Clemens died the following month of cancer. He wrote several books, but in his will he bequeathed several articles to his grandsons and wrote that he would leave some of his wartime souvenirs to his son-in-law, Thomas King. However, he said, they are relics of a war not nearly as murderous as the one he was fighting at the time. But his son-in-law died before he did. Northern newspapers wrote about Jeremiah Clemens and Huntsville resident George Washington Lane. They said they have walked through the fiery furnace of secession and emerged purified. John J. Ward was a mayor of Huntsville, and he and his wife had a number of children that are buried here, among them their twins, who died young. There was at one time a marble baby inside of this box, and it was surrounded by glass. And on top of it was 2 lambs, one with its head resting on the back of the other lamb. Not too many years ago, a vandal broke in and took the lambs on top and also the marble baby and destroyed them. Sadly, we don't know whatever happened to them, and we don't know where they are. But I'd like to talk about Captain Ward, because he was the commanding officer of Ward's battery, an artillery regiment. Captain Ward of Ward's battery was made up of young men from Huntsville area and also Limestone County. Their cannons were Napoleon 9-pounders, and they were left over from the Mexican War and the War of 1812. So they were already old, and during the war, after much use, some of them would explode because of the heat or crack. So they were very much at a disadvantage. On the morning of July 27, 1864, Captain Ward was on his horse next to General Matthew Ector when an enemy shell exploded, sending shrapnel into General Ector's leg and instantly killing Captain Ward. They were watching as the cannons were coming toward them, but one of them they thought was going to go past them when it exploded overhead. Their cannons were moved to farther and farther away from the Union Army, past some of the berms that were there. They were trying to decide what to do. Should they try to escape? Should they surrender? Should they keep fighting? But that cannon shell answered that for him. So then whoever took over was a man named Samuel Cruz, and they surrendered at Selma, Alabama at the end of the war. But during that fight, a Confederate soldier remarked that the Union soldiers seemed to walk up and take death as coolly as if they were wooden men. And another said, "Hell has broke loose in Georgia, sure enough." Daniel Robinson Alexander Campbell Hunley was born in Limestone County. He was one of 3 brothers who fought for the Confederacy. He was the commanding officer of the 31st Alabama Infantry. He was shot through the hip at Port Gibson and was left on the field to die, but he did not die. Instead, he went back with his unit. He still had a lot of pain, he was still an invalid pretty much, but he kept fighting. He was captured in Atlanta at Kennesaw Mountain, and he was taken to Johnson's Island as a prisoner of war. Johnson's Island was where they kept all of the officers. So he decided he was going to escape. He collected, as the prisoners came in, a complete Union uniform, and on January the 1st, 1865, he walked out of the prisoner of war camp across the frozen water into Sandusky, Ohio. It was his plan to go to Canada, and he said, "Lord God omnipotent, if it is this to be free, then break when thou wilt chains that bind one man to another." His plan was to walk at night and find a barn to hide in during the day, because the one thing that would give him away was his southern accent. This was successful for several days, several nights. He could not walk as far as he had planned to because of the wound to his hip. But then when he came into a small town, he decided to sleep in a real bed in an inn for the first time in years. And it felt so good he decided to stay a second night. But that was his undoing. Union soldiers who had been looking for him came to the inn, and when they came to his room, they found his orders that had been forged, and they said, "This says that you were supposed to be in Chicago 2 days ago." And he said, "Well, I went on a bender, and I decided it would be best to show up sober and late than inebriated and on time." "Okay, but this says that you're a private, and the buttons on your uniform show that you are an officer." And he said, "Well, boys will be boys. I wanted to impress the girls." Okay, we understand that. But when they started to leave, they found his yellowed Confederate ID, and that was it. He was arrested, taken back to the prisoner of war camp. Now, he had kept a diary all through this time, all the time that he was in the war, and at that time they took his diary away from him. On July the 25th, 1865, he signed an oath of allegiance to the United States government. They opened up the gates, and he was able to walk back home here to Huntsville. 9 years later, he got a letter in the mail. Somebody said, "I've got your diary and I'll sell it to you." And he wrote back, he was very angry. He said, "That is my diary from my experiences. I will not pay for it." And within a few days, it came to him in the mail with no expectation of money. Now, throughout this diary, he wrote about Abraham Lincoln, about how he had started this war and he kept it going, and the blood was on his hands, and what a horrible person he was. But the last paragraph of his diary, he said that he took back all that he had written about Abraham Lincoln, that he was an honorable man who gave his life for the cause that he believed in, which was a just cause. And his diary was published in a book, and it's called Prison Echoes of the Great Rebellion, and it is in reprint now, which can be found on Amazon.
I want to thank Jackie for coming out to Maple Hill Cemetery today and sharing her stories with us. I think we have plenty more to come in the months ahead. Thank you, Jackie.
You are welcome. We're in the Unknown Confederates, and it seems like a good place to wrap it up. I'd like to end it with this quote, written on March the 30th, 1864, by Union Private Jenkins Lloyd Jones of the 6th Battery of the Wisconsin Volunteer Army. As he strolled through the cemetery, he wrote, "I took a ramble through the town to the cemetery and spent half an hour in meditation among the sacred dead. There lay, side by side, the rich and the poor. Here are coward, patriot, and traitor. Truly all that is earthly passes away and leaves but faint traces behind."